Rain had fallen on the mountains for 30 minutes before she reached the Cedar Gate at the end of that forgotten Iron Creek road, her bare feet pressed into cold grey mud. The canvas satchel on her shoulder was swollen with water, her clothes pasted against a frame that exhaustion had carved down to nothing. A weariness settled so deep it lived in the bone. A stranger leaned against the damp fencewood, watching her with the quiet, measuring eyes of a man shaped by isolation. She did not cry. She offered no rehearsed explanation, no long account of suffering designed to earn pity. People who have spent entire lives needing too much from others eventually arrive at a place where words simply stop coming. She met his gaze with dark, hollow eyes, wet her lips, cracked by the relentless Montana sun, parched by a thirst nothing seemed to reach, and spoke the only sentence she had left. "Let me sleep in the barn. I'll work for my keep." He didn't answer right away. He stood motionless, reading her with that unhurried, guarded stillness you find in men who live where the ridgeline meets the sky. No cruelty in his expression, no warmth either. He was taking her measure, her worth, her exhaustion, without rushing toward a verdict. Mina allowed it. She no longer had the strength to guard herself from anyone's judgment. The mountain rain had soaked through to her marrow along that dusty Iron Creek track. Her canvas satchel had drunk the water until it weighed twice what it should. Grey mud clung thick around her bare ankles, and somewhere deep inside her, unspoken, barely understood, something was growing. A presence she couldn't yet name. But in recent days it had made her tiredness feel far too heavy to blame on sleepless nights alone. A gust sent a dry pine needle spinning between them as the sky bruised over into a deep, ugly purple. The man studied those gathering clouds with a deliberate eye, glanced toward the solid barn behind his house, then looked at her one last time. "Quote, 1, he said. His voice came out rough and spare, the sound of a man who rarely used it. Quote, 2. Mina gave a small nod, barely visible. No smile. She didn't waste her breath on thanks that wouldn't change anything. She pushed through the gate and crossed the yard toward the barn, feet sinking in cold mud, that heavy bundle dragging at her shoulder, at her spirit. Not once did she turn to check whether he still watched. Arthur stood at the gate, following her shape as it shrank against the barn door, and a thought rose that caught him off guard. How long since anyone had truly crossed that threshold into his life? The rain answered before memory could, crashing down in a sudden wall of water that hammered the barn's tin roof and churned the yard into a brown torrent. He retreated into his own house, but he lingered a beat longer than he needed to before sliding the bolt home. Arthur Miller was 43. He had lived alone on this ranch for close to 3 years. Complaining was not something he did. Never had been. He'd grown up in a house where men didn't weep, didn't ask for help, and never once let weakness show its face. That lesson had buried itself so far inside him that somewhere along the way he'd lost the ability to tell real strength from simple numbness. Claire had died on a cold March morning during a birth that should never have gone so wrong. The baby came far too early. An unseasonable thaw had turned the mountain road to slush and mud, impassable in places. The drive to the nearest hospital took twice as long as it should have. He'd gripped the wheel until his knuckles went white, jaw locked tight, talking to her the whole way, telling her it would be all right, begging her to keep breathing, telling her they were almost there. She made it to the hospital alive, awake. She never walked back out. The child didn't either. Arthur drove that flooded road home alone in the dark. The truck still held her perfume, and beneath it, the sharp antiseptic tang of the hospital. A silence had settled into his chest that night. It never left. The ranch died alongside him, slowly, without ceremony. Weeds choked the vegetable garden. He sold off the livestock, and the corrals went quiet. Fences sagged where posts rotted. He let it all happen. The wood stove stayed cold unless hunger clawed hard enough to force his hand. Chickens wandered free because nobody gathered them anymore. The house wasn't filthy, but it was hollow, a hollowness no visitor could see. It pressed into every corner, heavy and permanent. Sunlight through the windows didn't lift it. Sunlight only reminded him who should have been standing in its warmth. The closest neighbors lived 4 kilometers out. Town sat nearly 15 away. Weeks passed without a single figure on the road below. He'd stopped noticing the solitude, but tonight a mud-caked stranger slept across the yard. He had learned to carry that silence the way a man learns to carry a bad knee, not because the pain fades, because the body simply stops fighting it. Arthur woke to the smell of coffee. He lay still for a long while, eyes shut. His nose caught it before his mind could make sense of it. Rich, dark, old-fashioned coffee, the kind that fills a house from the kitchen outward, reaching the bedroom before any sound does. He hadn't brewed morning coffee in months. Most days he drank cold water, standing at the counter. Sometimes chewed a strip of dried jerky, if he remembered to eat at all. But coffee made this way, slow, steeped, heavy, that smell had disappeared from his home alongside everything else worth having. He opened his eyes, dark timber overhead. Grey light slipped through the shutter gaps, that pale, uncertain light before true dawn, when the day hasn't committed to arriving. He swung his legs off the bed and pulled on his boots standing, a reflex burned in by decades of ranch work, then walked toward the kitchen. She stood with her back to him. One hand worked the wood stove, the other gripped the handle of an old pot he'd forgotten still existed. She'd built the fire from the outside pile, wood still damp from last night's rain. Coaxing flame from wet timber took patience and effort. It had not come easy, but there it burned, a steady orange glow playing off the aged wall planks. The kitchen table looked different too. A folded cloth sat at its center, an old rag he used for other tasks. She'd washed it, wrung it dry, smoothed it flat like it belonged there. On top of it sat a mug of coffee and a wedge of cornbread. Made from cornmeal buried so deep in his pantry he preferred not to think about how long it had been there. Arthur stopped in the doorway. She felt him and turned. No surprise on her face, no smile. Just that same steady, level gaze from the night before. Quote 3, she said, voice low, even. Quote 4. He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved across the kitchen, the table, then her. I don't mind, he said at last. He pulled out a chair and sat. Both hands wrapped the mug, thick fingers, split-knuckled, ground dark with decades of soil. He drank that first swallow slow, eyes on the table. The coffee was strong, bitter, the honest way, the way only a wood stove brew can be. He said nothing more, drank it to the last drop. Her name was Mina. He learned this because she offered it freely, unprompted, while washing the mug in the basin after breakfast. My name is Mina, she said. I came from the southern valleys. I have no family left there. He nodded, asked nothing further. She gave nothing further. That was how their exchanges ran in those early days. Short, clean statements, stripped bare of decoration. Not from coldness, from experience. Both had learned, each in their own hard way, that too many words tangle what should be simple. The silence between them carried no weight. It was just space. The kind of space that settles between people who feel no need to pretend they have more to say than they do. After breakfast, Mina went outside. Arthur lingered in the kitchen a moment, listening. He heard the scratch of an old broom across packed dirt, chickens clucking as they shuffled out of its path, the sharp, rhythmic crack of a rug being beaten clean. He stood and looked through the window. She was sweeping the yard with that broom that had leaned against the barn wall so long mould had crawled up its handle. She swept in steady, unhurried strokes, gathering pine needles shaken loose by last night's storm, stray feathers, clods of mud now cracking dry under the young sun. No rush to her, no pause either, a quiet, even rhythm. the posture of someone who learned early that if you don't do the work, nobody will. Arthur watched her longer than he meant to. Then he grabbed his hat and went out the back door to see to his own tasks. That morning, for the first time in longer than he could recall, two people worked the same ground without getting in each other's way. She kept to the yard and the chicken coop. He was out in the pasture, fixing a loose board on the corral he'd sworn he would mend months ago. The sun climbed higher. It burned off what the rain had left behind, and the smell of wet earth drying began to rise through the air. That scent. Anyone raised in country like this carries it somewhere inside them forever. Warm, alive, thick with the promise of something new. Around midday, Arthur passed the chicken coop and stopped. Mina was crouched in the corner, gathering eggs the hens had scattered across the dirt floor. But it wasn't the eggs that held him. It was the way she crouched, too slowly, one hand pressed hard against her knee like she needed the brace. When she straightened, a shadow of dizziness swept her face. Just a flicker, gone before it could settle. She buried it fast. __, quote, _8__, she said, not looking at him, as though nothing had happened. Arthur nodded, said nothing, but he kept his eye on her after that. Lunch was rice and some old beans she'd found buried in the pantry, seasoned with what she could gather, garlic, salt, a dried bay leaf that had hung from a nail on the wall for God knows how long. Alongside it, scrambled eggs folded through with green onions growing wild in the neglected garden bed by the window. A simple meal, warm, made with a care that was quiet but unmistakable. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table and ate without speaking. Just the wind threading through the window frame and the far-off murmur of the creek down at the bottom of the ravine, a sound Arthur had stopped hearing long ago. Yet now it cut through to him, sharp and unmistakable. Halfway through the meal, Mina stopped eating. She stared at her plate. Then her hand drifted across her belly, that same motion as before, quick, nearly invisible. Arthur was watching when it happened. Her eyes lifted and found his. Neither of them spoke. Then she looked down and picked up her fork again. So did he. But something in the room had shifted. An unspoken truth had landed on the table between two plates of beans. Heavy, undeniable. That afternoon, pulling weeds from the pasture, Arthur couldn't shake it loose from his mind. He was not a man who inserted himself into other people's business. The mountains teach you that much. Every soul hauls its own weight. If they want to set it down in front of you, they will. You don't ask. You don't dig. You wait. But her exhaustion was something he couldn't look past. This wasn't road weariness. Wasn't sickness picked up between towns. It ran deeper than that, rooted somewhere fundamental. And that gesture, the palm pressed against her stomach, was the body knowing before the mind caught up. He recognized it. He'd seen Claire do the same thing. The understanding hit him like a fist to the sternum, then pulled back just as fast. What remained was that old ache in his chest. Not sharp anymore, just a dull heaviness that never fully lifts. He drove the hoe blade into the dirt and stood still, leaning his weight on the handle, staring down at the creek below. The water moved the way it always moved. The sun dropped low, painting the sky in that deep, weathered gold only high country reveals in late afternoon. How long since he'd actually stopped to look at it? Back at the house, dinner was already on the table. Chicken soup. Made from that lame hen hobbling around the yard, the one he hadn't had the will to catch for weeks. Making that kind of decision required an energy he simply didn't carry anymore. She'd caught it, cleaned it, cooked it down with rice and herbs. The smell filling the kitchen was the kind that goes past your nose entirely, straight into memory, into childhood, into a comfort you forgot you were starving for until it finds you again. Arthur sat and studied the bowl a moment before lifting his spoon. "Didn't have to kill the hen," he said. "Not a complaint. Just a statement." "She was suffering," Mina answered from the stove, her back turned. "A twisted leg makes every day a punishment. This was mercy. He didn't argue, he just ate. The silence between them that evening had changed. No longer the silence of strangers sharing a roof. This was the quiet of two people who were slowly, without rushing a thing, beginning to lower their guard. It was Tuesday, 3 days since she'd arrived. Mina had risen before dawn, the way she always did, lit the stove, brewed coffee, swept the yard, fed the chickens, scrubbed the linens that had been soaking since the night before. All of it finished before Arthur had swung his feet to the floor. That was how she operated. Her body woke and went straight to work. No lingering, no gathering of thoughts. Since childhood, this had been her way. Either her mother called her up before sunrise, or life did. And in recent years, it was always life, which carries no patience and keeps no schedule. Around 10 in the morning, when the sun stood directly overhead and the heat pressed down thick and motionless into the yard, Mina grabbed a bucket and a bundle of wash. She headed down the ravine toward the creek. The slope was steep, hemmed in by tall grass on both sides of a narrow trail someone, Arthur most likely, had cut through the brush years back. Tree roots twisted across the reddish earth like gnarled fingers. She went down slow, one hand steadying the bucket, the other catching at scrub branches for balance. The air shifted as she descended, cooler, thicker with moisture, carrying the smell of water and deep shade. The creek moved easy over worn stones, not wide, not deep. Just steady, the way water runs when it knows where it's going and sees no reason to rush. The near bank was a broad slab of flat rock, darkened with damp, smoothed by years, the kind of surface made for beating laundry clean. Across the water, thick woods pressed close, leaning over the current. Sunlight cut through the canopy in thin gold threads that shivered on the surface. Mina set the bucket down, stood still, just watched. She couldn't remember the last time she'd stopped long enough to see anything at all. The months behind her had been nothing but movement, leaving one place because there was no room, searching for another, turned away, moving on again. She'd carried her bundle from town to town like the weight of it might somehow ease the other burden lodged deep inside her, the one with no handles, no bottom, no setting down. But here, with the creek's low voice and the smell of wet earth thick around her, her body found a moment's stillness. She started on the clothes. Slow, deliberate motions. Soap, scrub against stone, wring, into the bucket. The rhythm of it, steady as the water, bred a strange calm. Work like this looks simple, but there's a quiet grace buried in it, peace that comes when the hands stay busy, and the mind is finally allowed to go still. She washed her own things, the kitchen rags, an old tablecloth gone thin at the edges. Then, without thinking much about it, she picked up Arthur's 2 shirts from beside the basin and worked soap into them too. It wasn't a decision. It was what you do when you share a roof with someone. You tend to what's near you because that's the decent thing. Shared ground between strangers builds its own silent obligation, no words required. That was when the dizziness found her. It came on slow, a strange warmth at the back of her neck first, then nausea climbing from her gut, the world tilting wrong. She had to stop. Eyes shut, palm flat against cold stone to keep from going down. She stayed that way a long time, breathing in the sound of the creek, the sun warm across her back. The feeling passed, eventually, but when she opened her eyes and tried to straighten, her legs had gone to water beneath her. This wasn't the weakness that comes from tired muscles. It rose from somewhere deeper, the kind of signal a body sends when it's trying to tell the mind something the mind isn't ready to hear. She stood at the rock's edge, staring down at the current, and slowly, carefully, pressed her hand flat against her belly. She held there a long while. The creek kept running, birds kept singing, and something inside her, a knowing that had been building for days, maybe weeks, finally set like stone. She closed her eyes. The tears came silent, no sobs, no show of it. They just ran down her face the way rainwater slides off rock. She didn't know if she cried from fear, from shock, from loneliness, or from that strange relief that comes when you finally stop running from what's true. Arthur saw her from the top of the ravine. He'd come back for a hoe left near the trail. Through the brush, at a distance, he caught her shape against the water, bent slightly forward, one hand on her belly, shoulders rising and falling with soundless grief. He did not go down to her. He knew, the way a man knows after enough years of losing, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is stay away. But he didn't leave. He stood among the trees like a sentinel she never asked for, watching her, small against that wide slab of rock in the thick woods. He studied the set of her shoulders, the hand pressed flat against her belly, wet hair clinging to her face. Something moved behind his ribs. Not want, not quite mercy either. Recognition. That raw, wordless thing that passes between two people when one sees their own suffering reflected in another. No introductions needed, no explanations required. He stayed until she stood, collected her pail, and started the climb back up. Then he slipped toward the pasture before she crested the ridge. All that afternoon, mending fence wire under a pale sky, Arthur thought about her. Not the way a man thinks about a woman he wants, the way a man thinks about something he feels bound to shield. At supper she was quieter than usual, and she was never loud. Forks scraped tin, wind pressed against the walls. A single lantern sat between them on the table, throwing unsteady gold across their faces, stretching their shadows long against the timber. Halfway through the meal, Arthur set his fork down. She raised her eyes. He held still a moment, turning the words over before releasing them. Not to sound careful, to be accurate. Quote 12, quote, he said. Quote 13, quote, quote 14, quote. Mina looked at him across the lamplight. She didn't say yes, didn't say no. She studied him with that deep, steady gaze he'd grown to respect. Not defiance, calculation, measuring whether something lurked beneath his offer. She found nothing hidden there. All right, she said, barely above a breath. Arthur nodded once, retrieved his fork, and went back to eating. The quiet that resettled over the table carried a different weight now. Honest weight. Something small and fragile had been set between them, like a bird knocked from its nest, unsure whether its wings would hold. That night Mina lay in the barn, creek water murmuring beyond the walls, and a thought surfaced unbidden. This place is not unpleasant. Not beauty, not warmth, just an admission that something lived here, in the smell of the soil, the drum of rain on the tin roof, the stillness of a man who didn't pry and didn't pretend she was invisible. After everything she'd survived, the absence of cruelty was no small thing. It was almost enough. The town sat 15 kilometers down a winding dirt road. Arthur brought her out early, before the mountain heat could settle its full weight on them. He rode the old buckskin, the only horse left on the ranch. Tired animal, reliable animal. It knew every bend in that trail by memory. Mina sat behind him, her bundle resting in her lap, gripping with her knees. She held herself apart from his back. She hadn't leaned on anyone in a long time. The ride was rough and real. Red dirt cut through stands of thick pine. The sky hung above them white as fresh milk. Arthur kept the horse at an easy walk. The animal had made this journey many times before, with a different rider. He let that thought pass through him without catching hold. Like a cloud. They covered most of the distance without a word exchanged between them. Near the edge of the small settlement, Mina's voice came low. Quote 17, quote 18, he said. That was all. Nora's place sat at the far end of what passed for a main street, a crooked line of sun-bleached buildings. A small house, paint faded to a dusty blue. Wild sagebrush sprawled thick across the front, releasing its sharp bite whenever wind moved through. Inside, the air carried lavender and beeswax, and that particular smell old houses hold in their bones. Nora was past 70. Her face bore every winter the mountains had given her. But her eyes cut with a brightness that missed nothing. She was small-boned, white-haired, that hair gathered in a loose chignon. A denim apron hung from her shoulders like something grafted to her skin. Her hands told a different story than her frame. Too large, too strong, shaped by decades of kneading bread, pulling herbs from hard soil, catching newborns slick with life. When Mina stepped inside, Nora was seated by the window, stitching a quilt with the slow deliberation of a woman who had outlived urgency. She glanced up. Her eyes moved across Mina's face, her posture, her hands. 2 seconds. That was all she needed. Quote, 19, she said. Mina sat, and without being asked, the words rose out of her, clumsy at first, catching in her throat, breaking apart where the grief pressed too hard. But they came. She told Nora about her mother's death, about Nathan casting her out with what she could carry and 2 days to vanish, about the shelters that never held, about a weariness so deep it had settled into her marrow. Nora did not interrupt. When Mina finished, the old woman stood, disappeared into the next room, and returned carrying a small vial of dried herbs. She pressed her palms to Mina's temples, held them there, eyes shut, lips forming words with no sound. __quote, _20, __, Nora said quietly. Mina did not move. Her eyes were dry. The creek had already claimed every tear she had left. Quote, 21, quote, she asked. Quote, 22, quote, Nora answered, settling back into her chair. Quote, 23, quote. Mina looked toward the window. A stray dog lay sleeping beneath a pine, its ribs rising slow. Midday light struck the blue walls of the house and made them glow. __quote, _24, __, Nora asked. No accusation in the question, only care. Mina drew a single breath. Quote, 25, quote, she said. Nora dipped her chin. Quote, 26, quote. Mina thought of the ranch, the iron stove, the creek bending through the pines, the man standing outside with the horse. Quote, 27, she said. And for the first time in years, the words did not feel like a lie. Arthur stood leaning against the fence rail, reins loose in his hand, eyes trained down the empty lane. He asked nothing when she came out. He simply looked at her. What he found in her face was not the despair he had braced for. It was something else, heavier than joy, lighter than grief, something he recognized without needing it named. He readied the horse. When she stepped forward to mount, he held out his hand. Open, steady, unhurried. She looked at it for a long moment, then set her palm against his and pulled herself into the saddle. He said nothing about the gesture. Halfway back to the ranch, the trail winding through late summer grass, she spoke. __, quote, _28, __. His hands did not tighten on the leather. His stride did not falter. Quote, 29, he said. She stared at him. Quote, 30. Quote, 31, he told her. Mina turned her face toward the passing timber and offered nothing more. But something behind her ribs loosened. Just barely, just enough. That afternoon, Arthur walked into his pantry and counted every jar, every sack, every tin on the shelves. He did not tell her, he simply did it. He tallied the provisions in his head, then crossed the yard to check the henhouse and the garden plot. He stood a long while before the overgrown patch, weeds chest-high and tangled. Then he picked up his hoe and started clearing. Mina watched from the kitchen window, a half-peeled potato in her hand. She watched the man bent over dark soil in the slanting afternoon light, shirt soaked through, that battered hat sitting crooked on his head. She understood what she was seeing. He was not gardening, he was turning earth so a child could eat. She went back to her potatoes, her eyes blurred, not from sorrow, but from something she had never learned to hold. The plain, unbearable weight of being tended to. The days found a rhythm after that. Neither of them spoke it into existence. It formed the way a game trail forms, footfall after footfall, pressing the same ground until the path becomes undeniable. Mornings, she rose first and lit the stove. He would catch the scent of coffee, pull on his boots, and appear in the kitchen doorway. They ate together in a quiet that carried no discomfort. A word about the weather, a remark about the fence line or the morning's work. After breakfast, Arthur worked the pastures. Mina stayed close to the house. By mid-morning, their orbits would cross. He needed a tool from the shed. She was crouched over the garden rows. Something easy had settled into these meetings, something neither of them named. At midday, she cooked whatever was on hand, and he ate like a man remembering what hunger felt like after years of forgetting. She learned to read him without words, the way his hand drifted toward a second helping without asking, the way he sat a beat longer at the table before pushing back his chair and heading out. He taught her things too, not deliberately, not like lessons. The way a river teaches the bank its shape, slow, constant, without announcement. One morning, under a low grey sky, a north wind just beginning to press, Arthur stopped in the yard. He studied the horizon the way other men study scripture. "Stay away from the creek today," he said. Mina paused, pail in hand. "Why? It looks calm enough." Winds turned. His eyes never left the ridgeline. "Carrying rain smell off the mountains. Creek'll be up by mid-afternoon. Won't touch the house, but that washing stone will be underwater." She searched the sky, trying to see what he saw. "How can you tell?" He thought on it a moment. "Creek tells you," he said. "But it speaks its own language. You have to learn how to listen." He walked off to his work. She stood there a while longer, feeling the wind press against her skin, reaching for whatever invisible thing he'd already grasped. That afternoon the creek swelled right on schedule. The washing stone vanished beneath dark, churning water. Mina's pregnancy moved forward in quiet increments. At first, only she knew. A careful eye might have caught it. Soon enough, no eye would miss it. The changes brought a new heaviness, morning sickness that left her grey-faced and hollowed out until well past 9. She never said a word about it, just adapted, smaller pale, sitting when she could, waiting out the nausea before touching her chores. Arthur noticed anyway. He shifted his own rhythms to match hers, and he did it without a single word spoken. The water bucket sat full every morning before she reached the kitchen. Firewood appeared stacked beside the stove like it had always been there. One morning, a broom leaned against the barn door. Shorter handle, lighter build. She stared at it for a long time. Then she stepped inside the barn, pressed her back against the wall in the half-dark, and breathed slow and careful until her composure held. The real storm came on a Wednesday night. Not some passing afternoon squall, a true mountain storm, the kind that means business. It broke at midnight and never let up, hammering the tin roof so hard it swallowed every other sound in the world. Arthur woke, knowing the creek would be savage. The house sat on high ground, safe enough. But the barn sat lower. He pulled on his boots, grabbed the lantern, and ran through freezing rain to the barn door. He pounded hard. "Mina, open up!" She answered fast, alert, guarded. "Creek's about to come over its banks," he called above the roar. "You can't stay out here tonight. Come to the house." She hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." No room for argument in his voice. "There's a spare room. Use it." The spare room had been Claire's. After she died, it became a place where memory collected like dust. Then just an empty room, bed made tight, as though someone might return any hour. Arthur lifted the lantern so Mina could see her way. A quilt covered the bed, stitched from scraps of coloured cloth. Claire's work, from some long-ago winter when her hands stayed busy against the cold. Mina looked at the quilt a long moment. "Sleep here," Arthur said. "I'm right through that wall if you need anything." He left, pulled the door shut soft behind him. On the other side, she lowered herself to the edge of the mattress and listened to the rain. Inside the house the sound changed, muffled, distant, safe. She lay back, drew the quilt to her chin, and slept, deeper than she had in months. No listening for footsteps, no bracing for what might come through the dark. They slept under the same roof that night, a thin wall of pine boards between them, closer than they had ever been. It was a Friday in August when the silence inside that house changed its nature. Mina had been quiet all day, not her usual quiet, something heavier. Arthur noticed she barely touched her coffee, noticed the way she stood at the window, palm pressed flat against her belly, staring at nothing. He didn't ask, but he stayed close, didn't ride out to the far pasture, didn't check the fence line. He kept himself within earshot of the front door. Come afternoon she went to her room, said her back ached. By midnight, a sound reached him through the walls, low, smothered, the kind of groan a person makes when they're trying not to make any sound at all. He was at her door in seconds. "Mina, can I come in?" She sat on the bed's edge, face drained of colour in the oil lamp's glow. "It started about 3 hours ago," she managed, her voice thin, split with pain. "I thought it would pass. It hasn't." Arthur didn't pause to think. He knew the distance to town, knew every rut and washout on that road. 50 they rode through mountains swallowed by darkness. No moon, just cold stars scattered across a black sky. Arthur sat behind her, arms bracketing her body, reins gathered in both hands. He felt every contraction roll through her. She never cried out, not once. He counted the gaps between them, growing shorter, closing like a fist. He pushed the horse harder. When they reached Faith's place, the midwife already stood in her doorway. One look at Mina told her everything. She drew the girl inside without a word. "You," she said to Arthur, jabbing a finger, "stay out here." So he sat on the porch steps, set his hat in his lap, watched the stars turn overhead for 2.5 hours. Through the walls came muffled sounds, sounds that knotted his stomach and stirred a hope he couldn't bring himself to name. Then it came, a sharp, thin wail cutting through the night, the unmistakable announcement of new life. Arthur shut his eyes, let out a breath that felt 3 years old. Faith pushed open the door, drying her hands on a rag. Quote, "55, she said, smiled. Quote, 56. Arthur stood. His legs weren't steady beneath him. "Can I see them?" Mina lay on the narrow bed, hair dark with sweat, but her eyes held a light he'd never seen there before. In her arms, wrapped tight in white cloth, a small wrinkled creature breathed. Arthur stepped closer. Quote, 58. Quote, she whispered. Quote, 59. Quote, Arthur said. He studied the infant, those tiny hands balled into fists, already gripping at the world. Quote, 60. Quote, 61. Quote, she said. Quote, 62. Quote, Arthur dipped his chin. Quote, 63. Quote. He stayed in that cramped, warm room, and something shifted deep in his chest. Something he'd believed was gone for good, broken beyond mending, stirred back to life because of this small, loud, impossible creature. They left for the ranch at first light. The sky hung pale violet above the ridgeline. Birds had begun their morning noise. Mina held Jack against her chest as she rode. Arthur walked beside the horse, one hand on the bridle, guiding them home. When they passed through the gate, he glanced up at her and the child. Remembered her coming through this same opening barely a month before. A stranger then, carrying nothing. Now she was the center of everything under that roof. Jack grew fast the way babies do. The wrinkled redness gave way to solid, round-cheeked weight. His presence filled every room in the house. He learned Arthur's voice early, broke into a gummy, toothless grin the moment the man crossed the threshold. Arthur's habits changed without him deciding they should. Doors closed gently now. His boots fell softer on the floorboards. He checked the boy between chores, quick glances that became long pauses. One morning, Mina sat nursing Jack at the kitchen table. She looked up at Arthur. "You want to hold him?" Arthur settled into the chair. She eased the baby's weight into his arms. He held the child with a steadiness that seemed born into his hands. Jack's eyes opened, dark, unfathomable, and fixed on the man's face as if measuring him. Then one small fist uncurled. Tiny fingers found Arthur's thumb and locked around it, held on with a grip that had no business being that strong. Arthur stared at that little hand, said nothing. But Mina saw it happen. Something in his face letting go. No tears, just a softening in a man who had forgotten how. She gazed through the glass and let the quiet settle between them. The past arrived uninvited on a Wednesday night. Arthur's dog broke into that particular bark, the one reserved for strangers. Nathan stood at the gate, Mina's stepfather. A younger man flanked him. Nathan looked older now, worn thinner by time, draped in an authority he'd stitched together himself. Quote, 65. Quote, he called. Quote, 66. Quote, Arthur stepped between the house and the two figures, lantern raised high. Nathan said. Mina appeared in the doorway. Jack rested against her chest. She looked at the man who had thrown her away. Something cold and final locked into place behind her eyes. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 70, underscore, underscore. Nathan started to push. Arthur's voice cut him short, granite wrapped in calm. She gave you her answer. Gates shut. Good night. Nathan measured the situation, found nothing in his favor. He and his companion dissolved back into the dark. Arthur watched until they vanished, then turned. Mina stood on the porch. Lantern glow spilled across her, across everything the two of them had built in a handful of months. He crossed the yard, snuffed the flame, and took his place beside her. She didn't go inside. She stayed. And then, for the first time, she leaned her head against his shoulder. A careful gesture, almost a question. His shoulder didn't move. Didn't flinch. He held steady for her. They stood like that beneath the mountain stars. The man, the woman, the child. The creek murmured below, telling the same story it always told, that water keeps moving regardless of what falls in its path. Years began to settle, one atop another, like growth rings in the old pines that circled the ranch. The recklessness of youth faded, the raw bite of old wounds dulled into something deeper, something earned. For those who have endured the long winters of the spirit, a truth reveals itself slowly. The greatest miracles arrive not as lightning strikes, but as the patient tending of soil, or the slow knitting of a heart torn open. We spend so many of our younger years in motion, running toward futures we cannot see, fleeing pasts we cannot change, only to learn that real strength lives in the willingness to stand still, to remain, to be the one who keeps the fire burning when the storm howls outside. There is a particular beauty in a life broken apart and pieced back together. Like cracked pottery mended with gold, the fractures don't weaken the vessel, they become the source of its worth. For Arthur and Mina, and for anyone who has ever stood before a locked gate, clutching nothing but a handful of tired hopes, the lasting truth is plain. Home is not found, it is built, one morning at a time. Through coffee poured for someone else's hands, a gate made stronger so a child sleeps safe. Fingers laced together in the dark when the memories press too close. Love, we come to understand, is not the fevered thing of youth. It is the decision to carry part of another's weight, and in doing so, lighten the loneliness they bear. Age teaches us that the world rarely cares about our suffering, but we were never meant to face that indifference alone. The creek runs whether we grieve or rejoice. But someone standing beside you on its bank makes the water sound different, sweeter. We learn that every act of kindness is a small rebellion against the cruelty of things. To trust again after betrayal, to offer tenderness after abandonment. That is the true measure of a human being, the quiet endurance that marks a life worth having lived. Looking back, We see it clearly. The moments we mistook for endings were only the first words of a deeper story. In the end, the tale of Iron Creek belongs to all of us. A reminder that no matter how late the hour, how long the road behind, it is never too late to plant something new. Never too late to hold the door open for another. And life, for all its chaos and cruelty, does offer a road back toward light. If a soul is willing to bleed for it, if a soul is patient enough to endure the dark, what a man builds by choice holds stronger than what he inherits by blood. Chosen bonds don't break the same way. They are forged in the staying, not the obligation. And somewhere inside that stubborn devotion, a stillness settles, quiet as snowfall on open range. The kind of peace that defies explanation. The simple, bone-deep knowing that the wandering is done, that he is, at last, home.